Arms control is often talked about as if it's a distant technical issue, but its role in managing today's nuclear risks is more critical than ever. With treaties expiring, inspections limited, and strategic mistrust deepening, the question is no longer whether arms control matters, but how it can be effective in the current environment. This is the Nuclear Table, where policy meets people. I'm your host, Dr. Ian Fleming Zhou. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Nikolai Sokov, who previously worked for the Soviet Union's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and went on to work for the Russian Federation's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Nikolai participated and was directly involved in the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, START 1, START 2, and multiple other arms control negotiations. Our conversation focuses in particular on New START, its role in managing US-Russia strategic stability, what its potential expiration means for the global nuclear order, and why risk reduction may now be the most realistic and urgent priority. This is not a retrospective discussion, it's about what comes next and whether the international system still has the capacity to manage nuclear danger. Nikolai, welcome to the Nuclear Table.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start by looking at the immediate future of strategic arms control, something you have negotiated firsthand in past treaties. With New START set to expire on February 5, 2026, is there any realistic way, a renewal, a short extension, or even a stopgap deal to stop strategic arms control from collapsing? From your perspective, as someone who has been at the forefront of these negotiations, what would that look like in practice?
Let me actually start by noting that it's not like the United States and the Soviet Union and Russia have always had legally binding limitations on their nuclear weapons. Sometimes there were gaps. Sometimes this gap lasted for several years. But even when such a treaty was not in force, which was the case, for example, is in the 80s, at least the two parties conducted negotiations to create a new treaty.
What's striking in how you are laying this out is that past gaps still had a sense of forward motion. Negotiations were at least underway, whereas now we are facing a moment with neither a treaty nor a process to replace it. So, this isn't just about New START expiring, it's about the absence of any mechanism or political momentum to follow it.
What's likely going to happen next year is that on not only there'll be no treaty, but also, well, it doesn't seem likely that the two parties will actually begin negotiations on a new one. The text of the treaty allowed for only one extension for 5 years. That possibility was actually used back in 2021. So the treaty is now nearing the end of the only allowed extension. In September, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, proposed to the United States that the two parties agree to informally abide by numerical limits of New START for 1 year, yes, and with an option of extending it further. President Trump said this was an interesting proposal, but so far the United States has not given a response to it. This issue was debated in the interagency kind of process. They did not come to a position that could be submitted to the president, and somehow the issue kind of died. He did have experience of, of similar kind. In 1980, the United States withdrew the SALT II treaty from ratification, so it never entered into force. But in 81, the new president, Ronald Reagan, suggested that the two parties, the United States and the Soviet Union, could informally abide by SALT II. A new START was negotiated rather hastily mostly in 2009. The previous treaty, START 1, expired. Unfortunately, there wasn't a treaty in place to replace the START 1 treaty. The George W. Bush administration, for a variety of reasons, was reluctant to begin new negotiations. So when President Obama came to the White House, well, that was kind of the situation that START 1 would expire in less than a year. And the most important part of START 1, the real reason why it was valuable, was the transparency, the verification of regimes that it contained. Yes, and overall, all the measures that assured the predictability of the strategic balance between the two sides. START 1 numbers were no longer relevant. By that time, the United States and Russia had about only 1/3 of the allowed limits. But of course, verification and data exchange were extremely useful. So the idea was to have very quickly a new treaty that would restore the regime of transparency, verification, data exchange, and so on measures. So the two parties negotiated to start. Time was short. So really kind of all the inspection data exchange issues were at the center, were the main drive. The numerical kind of limitations and other limitations were rather kind of secondary. The treaty was made on purpose simple. They de facto agreed not to discuss the majority of contested issues. So they left outside missile defense, long-range conventional weapons, this, that, the nuclear stockpiles, well, the stockpiles is of nuclear warheads, and so on and so forth. So it was a very simple kind of treaty that was intended largely as a quick fix to provide predictability while the parties negotiate a new, more comprehensive treaty. It just so happened that the quick fix, a temporary solution, in fact, became kind of the cornerstone right now is of arms control. We just need to understand that New START was never intended to be the cornerstone. That happened because it's after the signing and the entry into force of New START, the two parties simply failed to begin new negotiation. What they had was the strategic stability dialogue, so-called, which was essentially 1-2 higher level meetings every year, each meeting lasting only 1-2 days. That cannot even be called negotiations. They were just rare consultations, occasional. So that's not really serious. When we look at New START today, we just need to understand its place, in history of arms control. First. Second, in the spring of 23, actually, Russia decided to suspend New START. It was to a large extent over the really kind of deep, fundamental, very comprehensive crisis in the bilateral relationship over the war in Ukraine. There were some other matters that I will not go into. But as a result, Russia decided to suspend. Under the suspension kind of rules outlined in the Vienna Convention, you're not supposed to do anything to defeat kind of the purpose of the treaty. So basically, Russia is obligated to abide by all limitations of New START, but is not obligated to take any action in the implementation, such as conduct inspections or receive inspections, or provide various kinds of data to the United States. So when Vladimir Putin proposed to extend adherence to the American limits of New START, he essentially meant that the regime that has existed since the spring of 23, the conditions of suspension, would simply continue. So we just need to understand that it's a very limited scope, actually, proposal. The numerical limits are the less important part of New START, whereas the most important, the main reason for the existence of New START, verification and transparency, were suspended 3 years ago. So that's kind of the bottom line.
It really seems like the real value of this proposal isn't in the ceilings themselves, but in what they signal politically. especially at a moment when verification has collapsed. So I want to press you on that. Does an informal commitment to numbers actually stabilize behavior, or does stability ultimately depend on restoring verification and transparency?
Well, I think it's a genuine offer, which basically just ensures that the strategic balance remains unchanged for some time. As we'll assess this proposal, well, it's simply useful to keep in mind that the strategic balance is very resilient. Yes, it cannot be changed over 1 year, 2, even 3 years, right? It takes years to really kind of change a strategic balance is in a tangible kind of way. So, it's in effect, neither the United States nor Russia will be able to seriously increase the number. The proposal to abide by numerical limits does not really hurt either side. It can be reported to the NPT review conference, and the two countries might actually say, well, you see, we do actually take our obligations under Article 6 seriously. So a small political gain, uh, since you cannot undermine the strategic balance anyway, no loss.
So, while the overall strategic balance may be resilient in the near term, the real challenge quickly shifts to verification, right? The question being, can the United States and Russia realistically restore the data exchanges and inspections that make New Start more than just numbers on paper?
That would be difficult, but more feasible than extension of New Start. Uh, uh, the challenge, of course, well, in addition to the general kind of political challenge that Russia apparently does not really want, kind of, well, at least at the moment, to give a will to go back to verification. Well, in principle, there can be an executive agreement between the two governments but about a standalone measure to conduct all the data exchange and verification activities, yes, under New Start, without reviving the treaty as a whole, just that part. So, yes, they can have such an executive agreement. I mean, politically, it's not likely at the moment, but in the case the United States and Russia continue kind of more stable, more kind of normal, slightly more constructive relationship that they have at this moment, well, then such an agreement becomes feasible. Yes, I would say that politically, the prospects of some form of verification and transparency will really depend on the outcome of the ongoing negotiations, the war in Ukraine. But this cannot be just done by an executive agreement because, well, especially in the United States, any of the activities like inspections should be funded. So you must actually go to Congress, say, to include relevant spending, yes, into the federal budget. So there are some very, very modest actual chances, but in fact, it's not impossible to have with an agreement to revive the verification system. But it will depend on both the state of relations between the two countries and domestic politics.
Nikolai, you have just explained how restoring verification depends on political will and practical feasibility. Following that, I want to ask about the consequences. With New Start still on paper, but its inspections and data exchanges largely eroded, how risky is the gap between the treaty's limits and reality? Can numerical ceilings alone keep behavior in check, or does the lack of verification leave us exposed?
Well, without verification, it's actually not very stable, which is why I said that Putin's proposal to abide by numerical limits only provides very small benefit. Well, we know all the rocky, very controversial histories of arms control in the past, like 15 years. Uh, and it appears very, very likely, very possible, I would say, or even likely, that a year, 2 years ago, one of the sides will declare that the other is violating this like, informal agreement, is going like above the limits. So without verification, without a mechanism to resolve all these kind of suspicions, I think the situation will remain highly unstable and very vulnerable to the political kind of winds. New Start's main purpose was verification, was data exchange, was transparency, and so on and so forth. And without them, simple agreement on numbers will not matter much. Well, I mean, yes, it'll matter some, but it will be extremely vulnerable. And we risk a serious kind of scandal, a serious crisis.
If inspections are not happening, it seems like some activities could quietly shift the strategic balance without anyone realizing. From your experience, which areas are the most worrying and why?
Well, inspections do serve to confirm things. Generally, the structure of limitations in New Start, uh, a lot of it can be verified through national technical means, right? So we know a lot. We can know a lot about what's going on with strategic weapons, both sides. The problem is slightly different. Well, your satellites detected some suspicious activity. And if you can conduct an inspection, yes, if you have, it's a bilateral commission where you can raise this issue, you can resolve this suspicion. But if you don't have these tools, you will just make a public statement or something, yes, and you have a full scale crisis on your hands. The situation is made even more, I would say, sort of unstable and risky because we know that both sides do work on various programs. Now, the United States is beginning, well, a rather wholesale, large scale replacement of strategic delivery vehicles. Uh, the ones it has now are old, yes, and cannot continue. They must be replaced. We know that Russia is working on new kinds, on new categories of strategic weapons. That nuclear powered cruise missile, nuclear powered torpedo, right? So eventually, the strategic balance will be changing. It will not happen in 1, 2, 3 years, as I said, but eventually it'll be changing. Furthermore, the United States is very concerned about the buildup that we see in China. So the United States government might simply decide, well, we do need more, actually, deployed strategic weapons because we need to deter not only Russia, the traditional mission, but also China. So all these elements do kind of create a potential instability in the strategic balance.
You have highlighted a few of the developments on both sides, all of which could slowly change the strategic balance over the coming years. Building on that, one argument we hear from Moscow is that New Start no longer captures the full picture, especially with what they call the new strategic systems, as you pointed out. Um, at the same time, the US continues to invest in missile defense architectures that Russia sees as destabilizing. From your perspective, how central are these so called super weapons and US missile defense ambitions to Russia's reluctance to extend or deepen arms control today?
Well, these are actually different things. You can have various programs, both in Russia and the United States, to create, say, new strategic weapons, to deploy strategic weapons. But at the same time, you can have arms control negotiations. So, I want to emphasize that it's really vital that the two parties begin new negotiations, begin to negotiate a new treaty. And that's really the only way forward.
Both Washington and Moscow now point to a range of structural challenges: missile defense, conventional precision strike, alliance dynamics, and evolving nuclear doctrines. Drawing on your experience negotiating START 1 and START 2, which of today's obstacles do you see as genuinely new, and which are really just familiar issues that negotiators have faced before, maybe under different labels?
Yes, some issues are new, some old. Start by going back to first answer to your first question, when I said that New Start was a quick fix. So parties try to negotiate it as fast as possible. Yes, and they really kicked the can down the road. They did not address the most difficult, the most controversial issues. But that does not necessarily mean that these issues have left the agenda. In fact, yes, in Moscow, they think that New Start was a huge concession to the United States precisely because, yes, actually, Russia, for example, agreed not to raise missile defense. But it did actually indicate that missile defense will be on the table during the next talks. Future negotiations. Same with long range conventional weapons. Now we have strategic conventional weapons, and that's really kind of something new, something that was not the case in the past. The United States does have its own agenda, yes, and that's the stockpile of nuclear warheads. It's important to understand that all treaties so far, including New Start, they don't exactly address nuclear weapons themselves. Well, all the physical nuclear weapons that explode, right? They only address the delivery vehicles that carry nuclear weapons. So when we even discuss numbers, such as the limit of 1550s and New Start, that's accountable actually weapons, not actually physical weapons. So the United States has wanted, and Obama set that as the agenda back in 2011 to discuss the nuclear stockpile. So lots of issues to resolve. Well, in fact, the differences between the agendas of the two sides and the challenges on how you address them, because as I said, we don't really have any experience with long-range conventional weapons. We have no experience with nuclear stockpiles. So all these challenges and all the differences were, I think, one of the main reasons why the United States and Russia actually failed to begin negotiations since 2010. But you do need to start addressing that. And I don't really think it will be possible to do once again the same thing, just to leave all kind of controversial issues aside and just doing a simple treaty complete with verification and data exchange. What you're going to verify? So you see, if you think, for example, that missile defense, the Golden Dome, will really undermine strategic stability. Well, in case it's implemented, long way down the road, but what if? Okay, so yes, you want kind of to put something to that effect in the treaty. I wonder what the United States says is if Russia actually goes ahead with anti-satellite weapons that can destroy a significant part of the Golden Dome. Well, I know actually what the United States is going to say. The United States actually does want to ban anti-satellite weapons. Well, because they're a threat to American assets in space. But okay, why do you ban things that the United States doesn't like and don't ban things that Russia doesn't like? So it's all very kind of big political kind of issues, and you do need to negotiate. You do need to sit down and keep negotiating for months in a row. I mentioned that this strategic stability dialogue that was so kind of famous within 2010s under Obama was really not negotiations. It was just polite meetings to state official positions. That's all. There were only two instances when the two parties really kind of tried negotiating. When they created working groups that met day in, day out, like every day, quietly behind closed doors, asking questions, seeking clarifications, trying to understand the position of the other side, so on and so forth. One instance was in the late summer and early fall of 2020. Yes, it might actually sound surprising, but in fact, the first real negotiations is after a new start was not under Obama, it was actually under Trump. But that was the case, and I think really the motivation of the Trump administration was not about arms control now. Yes, it was just about kind of the thought that maybe it's an agreement with Russia would improve its chances in the upcoming re-election. Um, but they almost actually reached a framework for the new treaty. It took them about 2 months uh, to negotiate, and they were very close. In fact, these negotiations, these working groups, did achieve one big breakthrough, absolutely unique, because actually Russia, for the first time ever, agreed to put its nuclear stockpile, the physical warheads, is on the table. Okay, well, they did not actually reach like an agreement, uh, stopped basically negotiations without reaching final agreement. The second attempt was at the end of 21, in December 21, and into January 22, when once again the United States and Russia created working groups to discuss the framework for the next treaty. Uh, uh, I heard from people in the State Department who participated in these consultations that, in fact, it was quite positive. And they said, well, it turned out that the differences between the two parties were actually less severe than it seemed from public statements. That's it. So we had two very short-lived attempts, which so far only demonstrate that you can actually work to resolve all these big differences. But you do need to sit down. I do hope that the two parties find the political will to sit down.
I agree with you. At its core, this really is about states needing to sit down and negotiate. And right now, that willingness just isn't there at all. What's striking is that during the Cold War, when ideological divisions were arguably far deeper, arms control frameworks were actually flourishing. Even at moments of intense rivalry, there was still a shared understanding that dialogue was necessary to prevent catastrophe. Today, by contrast, we are watching the steady dismantlement of those frameworks, the agreements, the habits of consultation, the institutional muscle memory. All of that is eroding. And for a lack of a better word or a better phrase, the vibes are off. It's really not giving strategic stability at all, because there are so many lessons from the Cold War about political will, risk management, separating interests from ideology that we seem to have forgotten just when we need them the most.
Well, let me maybe actually, let me comment on what you said, the comparison between the Cold War arms control and arms control today, or rather, I would say the absence of arms control today. Yes, that's completely true. I think one of the reasons is after the end of the Cold War, we stopped fearing nuclear war. During the Cold War, there was intense fear that you make the wrong step, it's going to be really bad, right? We had an arms race. Everyone understood that the arms race was dangerous and wasteful. So why not try somehow contain it, limit it? So these were things that were driving arms control to a large extent. And the intensity of these feelings was such that even when governments were reluctant to engage in arms control, there was huge pressure from the public, from the elites, from everyone, from the international community, get back to the table. When Reagan administration came to the White House, yes, in 1981, they did not want to do any arms control. The Reagan attitude was we first need to deploy a lot of weapons, yes, and then we can actually talk to the Soviets. But pressure was huge inside the United States, from allies, from the entire global community. So Reagan had to agree to begin negotiations. Now, one, the fear of nuclear war is significantly less. We almost forgot about arms control. There is really no pressure. Well, it's like expert community kind of talks about the need to do it, but otherwise, the interest in arms control is less politically relevant, and political leaders, obviously, we're really playing with danger. We should is actually engage in arms control.
Thank you for bringing that up, Nikolai. What really stands out for me is not just the absence of fear, but the normalization of that absence. For instance, during the Cold War, fear functioned almost as a stabilizing force. It constrained behavior, sharpened decision making, and created pressure for arms control, right? And here we are today. What we are seeing instead is a kind of strategic complacency. The risks haven't disappeared, but psychologically they have been pushed out of view, which arguably makes the situation more dangerous and not less. It's really worrying.
Well, I take part in various meetings. They're concerned about possible conflict with Russia. They're concerned about escalation, but they don't even want to discuss the risk that nuclear weapons actually might be used in such a conflict. Why? I don't know. There is kind of that kind of joke. It's about the ostrich. Well, the ostriches are supposed kind of to hide their head in the sand if there is something dangerous, right?
The United States increasingly argues that any future strategic arms control must include China, while Beijing continues to reject parity based frameworks. Russia has at times echoed this position, though not consistently. From your perspective, is bringing China into strategic arms control a realistic prerequisite for progress, or has it become a convenient rationale for inaction?
That's the most difficult issue. How many countries should be negotiated? Oh, I don't have an answer. Chinese deterrence was based on, like on a possibility that it will be able to send one or two nuclear weapons to the United States. The requirement for deterrence is much tighter. So I think China is building up simply because, well, that's a different geopolitical environment and it can no longer be satisfied with the minimal level of deterrence as it used to have. But that creates a major problem. Indeed, during the Cold War, it was easier because there were only two nuclear superpowers. Yes, they negotiate. Right. How you deal with a triangle, no one knows. In fact, all the theories of arms control that was developed during the Cold War actually suggests that it's almost impossible. The last multilateral arms control kind of treaty that established actually concluded in 1922. That's the Washington Naval Treaty. It was 100 years ago. During INF negotiations, actually, the Soviet Union wanted to include the British and the French forces into negotiations, at least de facto. Yes, after some years of negotiations, it made a concession. It decided not to count the British and the French. But you know what? In a world where the Soviet Union had about 30,000 nuclear weapons, yeah, you can really kind of forget about the British and the French. You got more than enough weapons for everyone. Well, today, of course, yes, the nuclear arsenals are quite big, but not that big. If you count deployed weapons, it's actually less than 4,000. 30,000 then, it's 4,000 now. So kind of the space for concessions is much smaller. 40 years ago when I began, I could go 1,000 here, 1,000 there. It was almost nothing. Well, not the case now. So how do you get China's agreement? One big issue, but if you happen to resolve it, then you'll have to resolve the Russian demand for the British and the French. Yes, and then you have to somehow convince the French to take part in arms control. So it's many stages of extremely difficult.
It really shows how structurally hard this becomes once you move beyond a bilateral world. So, if we were to enter a world with no formal strategic arms control, what would worry you most in the first 1 to 2 years? Force posture changes, misperception, signaling failures, or the onset of arms racing?
We will not see changes in nuclear postures right away. We'll have a lot of misperceptions, a lot of suspicions. There will be planning based on worst case kind of scenarios. So, yes, the arms racing will not only take place, but will be made actually worse by all the kind of political kind of pressures. My experience in arms control suggests that you can resolve anything as long as you have political will. But given the complexity of all these matters, I would say that the more immediate approach, or the more immediate kind of measures to be taken, is actually the reduction of risks. That would be very, very. The risk reduction regimes, the systems of risk reduction measures, and the confidence building measures that we have today in place, it's actually a very good system. But it's a legacy system. That's a system that we inherited from the Cold War times. A lot has changed. New technologies, new weapons, you name it. So it does need updating. That should be the most immediate is actually task for the international community and especially for the P5. What does it include? You do need to have reliable communication channels, for example. The only communication channel that can be used reliably in a time of crisis right now is between Washington and Moscow. Europe does not have such channels to Moscow. It's actually the probability of like a militarized kind of conflict, of escalation between Europe and Russia is very high, but like any crisis, you need to maintain communication. How can you maintain communication between Europe and Russia? You cannot really. Yes, you just got a regular phone. Yes, so you got like embassies, stuff like that. That's simply not enough. So the first task is really to establish secure, very reliable communication channels between at least the key capitals. Number one. Number two, we do need confidence building measures like notifications about various activities. For example, during the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union really feared strategic large-scale war between the two countries, they agreed on notifications when you launch even a single kind of strategic weapon, right? So that you don't suspect it's the beginning of an attack. That you know, okay, yes, there will be like a launch of a strategic missile. Great, yes, I know what's happening. No misperception. So everything is stable. Now we have a lot of other weapons that have never been subject to any such regimes. We have long range conventional weapons. Okay, one might not be dangerous, but like 50, for example, is even like a dozen of cruise missiles might be seen as dangerous. So you do need notifications, you do need advanced knowledge about launches that other countries might actually consider threatening. So we do need a whole new expanded systems of confidence building and and foremost notifications about launches of missiles. So these would be things that I think should be addressed as soon as possible. The P5 has actually been trying to discuss risk reduction so far without success, but that's actually quite understandable. A war is going on. You don't really do any kind of reduction risk measures yes, in the middle of the war. But if the war ends, which I hope it will soon, then yes, there'll be time. And I frankly expect that Russia will be interested in risk reduction measures, in confidence building measures. It has got a very long and positive kind of record since the 70s. So, yes, arms control will take time, but while we negotiate on arms control, there are things that are more doable, that can be achieved faster, and that can actually serve as a foundation for arms control.
As we wrap up, I always like to end with two final questions. What, if anything, gives you hope about the future of nuclear diplomacy, especially given where we are right now? And if you could offer one piece of advice to the next generation of arms control practitioners, what would it be?
What gives me hope? We've been through difficult times, all right? I started my career in arms control. I'll celebrate 45 years in arms control next year. And I remember, like in '83, for example, my friends and I were discussing when World War III, nuclear World War III, might actually take place. Or this atmosphere of danger that was extremely imminent. Well, I lived through very, very bad kind of times there, very dangerous times. We were able to step back, and then we concluded really groundbreaking kind of treaties. Yes, I participated in negotiations that resulted in the reduction of, oh, it's hard to calculate precisely, but about 30,000 nuclear weapons. Oh, something to be proud of. Unfortunately, the sad kind of side of my story is that none of the treaties and regimes that I negotiated are working on it. So huge kind of crisis in arms control. Yes, all regimes are collapsing, but at least yes, I did contribute to something really good. So I take some optimism uh, from the fact that we already lived through very dangerous times. I lived through very dangerous times, and we were able to address these things and resolve them and step back from the precipice. And I think we can do that again. I just think that it would be really, really important and useful for the public, the elites, yes, everyone, for the international community to apply pressure on nuclear states. Now, I do not advocate pressure to eliminate nuclear weapons. All right. Yes, elimination of nuclear weapons, nuclear disarmament is something that we really need, right? But we cannot really do that right away. Okay. Yes, and if you go to the United States and Russia and say, "Well, guys, let's eliminate nuclear weapons," right? They'll say, "No, that's it." Try to concentrate on something more kind of feasible. Right now, I would like to step away from of from the risk of even limited nuclear use. All right. Yes, I want to stabilize the strategic, yes, and regional deterrences. Once we have a more stable world, we can actually think about elimination of nuclear weapons. Yes, but if you start kind of shooting kind of too far, yes, you actually might actually make things worse. The advice to the young kind of generation: if you really try, you can resolve any challenge. It's wrong kind of to say, "Oh my God, well, all multilateral negotiations, we don't know how to do that. Oh, we don't know how to address missile defense. Oh, we don't know how to address nuclear stockpiles. This, that." Yeah, we don't know, but that's not the reason not to work, right? Yes, if you really try, you can do it. So just keep your optimism, and as long as you apply enough effort. There is only one reason why you might fail: if you stop talking. Yes, if you stop communicating to the other side, and especially then. I found myself many times in the situations where I felt like, okay, I really hate your position, but I like you. So let's so keep trying, yes, and keep the human contact.
Nikolai, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights so candidly. This was an incredibly rich and important conversation. And I really appreciate the time that you took out of your day to join me here on the Nuclear Table podcast.
So thank you, Ian. Yes, well, as any old person, I like to share my wisdom.
So today's conversation has emphasized that New Start's expiration is more than just a calendar date. It's a signal about the state of global strategic stability. We heard how verification, transparency, and political will interact, and how, as Nikolai reminded us, treaties are only as strong as the commitment behind them. As arms control practitioners, the challenge is clear. How do we rebuild both the mechanisms and the mindset that once made strategic restraint possible? As the arms control infrastructure erodes, atomic anxiety abounds. This has been the Nuclear Table. Until next time, goodbye.